I will now yield to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Young, for the purpose of an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Eugene R. Tempel is the founding dean of the School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, which is happily nestled in Indiana's 9th Congressional District. He's also President Emeritus of IU's foundation. At the IU School of Philanthropy, Dr. Tempel is leading the planning and organization of the world's first school dedicated to the study and teaching of philanthropy. He's a nationally known expert on philanthropy in the nonprofit sector and former executive director of the Center on Philanthropy at Indiana University. Dr. Tempel, as a fellow Hoosier and on behalf of the committee, I'd like to express my gratitude for your presence here today, and I thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young, and Mr. Tempel, welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes. If you could speak directly into the microphone and turn it on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Levin, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I am the founding dean of the Indiana University School of Philanthropy, formerly known as the Center on Philanthropy at Indiana University, founded in 1987. The school's researchers are among the most respected sources of objective research on U.S. charitable giving and the factors that influence it. Their research is the basis for my testimony today. Charitable giving has been a cornerstone of American society since before our nation was founded. The Massachusetts Bay Colony led one of the first formal fundraising drives in 1641. Giving is an important way citizens exercise democracy. Each year, 65% of Americans give to charity, higher than the percent of people who vote. Giving is a tremendous force in our society. An estimated $298 billion was given to charities in 2011, according to our research. 73% of that came from living individuals. Because of charitable giving's enormous scope and impact, I urge you to investigate carefully the various effects tax policy can have on giving before deciding whether and how to change policies in ways that may have significant positive or negative consequences for the nation's more than 1 million charities and the people they serve. Federal tax policies have a significant impact. Our research shows that the cost of giving, the amount it actually costs taxpayers to make a gift after taxes, affects how much they contribute and the timing of their contributions. Our research and research by colleagues elsewhere has looked at how various federal tax policy changes impact charity. Raising marginal tax rates reduces the amount of after-tax income available for giving, but lowers the cost of giving by increasing the value of the tax deduction. Raising taxes alone without other policy changes that affect giving is usually a net positive for giving. Capping or eliminating the charitable deduction negatively affects giving. It reduces households' incentives to give to charity or to give as much as they might have. If rates increase and the charitable deduction is capped or reduced, this would produce a double whammy for giving because it both reduces after-tax income and increases the cost of giving. Reducing incentives for giving is especially likely to affect giving by higher income households, which account for a disproportionate share of U.S. household giving. IRS data show that the top 10% of income earners at $100,000 or more gave almost 2/3 of all itemized contributions in 2009. The top 1% gave 37%. Many charities rely on gifts of $100,000, $500,000, or $1 million, the gifts most affected by the combination of raising taxes and reducing or eliminating the charitable deduction. That would have a detrimental impact on the services charities provide. Our study of gifts of $1 million or more shows that more than a third of the total dollar amounts of these gifts were given to foundations. Just under a third went to higher education. The next highest totals went to health care and the arts. In our 2012 survey, wealthy donors were almost evenly divided on whether or not they would decrease their giving if the charitable deduction were eliminated. The School of Philanthropy analyzed the Obama administration's 2011 budget proposals to raise rates and reduce the charitable deduction for higher income taxpayers. We estimated that if both proposals had been enacted, total itemized household giving would have fallen by 1% in total, and giving by the higher income households specifically affected would have fallen by 2.4%. These decreases may not seem huge in total, but they could have a greater impact for individual charities, especially in the context of other factors impacting charitable giving. Our extensive research demonstrates that charitable giving is closely tied to the economy. Charities are still striving to recover from the Great Recession. Giving has dropped by more than 15% in 2008 and 2009 combined after adjusting for inflation. Giving began to grow again in 2010 and 2011, but it is relatively slow in growth, reflecting the country's slow economy. If donations were to continue to grow at the post-recession average pace of 1.8%, it could take over 5 years for charitable giving to return to 2007 levels. Finally, the health of the economy, or the health of philanthropy, depends on the health of the economy. Finding ways to address the nation's economic challenges without curbing the growth of charitable giving will ensure the continuity of services upon which our fellow citizens depend. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
I want to give everyone else on the panel a chance to comment. I know that you represent tax-exempt organizations that do incredibly important work, and the charitable deduction helps you fulfill that mission, as you've testified. And the primary focus of this committee for the next year is to produce a tax reform plan that broadens the base and lowers rates. So if you care to, you don't have to, if you'd like to comment on Mr. Sturley's and Mr. Collinvaux's statements that there might be a mix of policy options that could help us broaden the base in tax reform while also preserving the level of giving.
I would say simply that that a floor is better than a cap, because it pushes charity toward the top and where the cost of giving will have an impact. I fully support the notion of a credit for non-itemizers as well. Congress did a wonderful thing in providing us with a 5-year experiment in the early 80s, and that experiment can be examined, and you can get real data from the impact that had. Some economists at the time believed that some kind of a small floor there would have pushed giving up as well. So those things do provide an incentive. We have one study out of the University of Michigan's panel study on income dynamics, where we have our own panel study on philanthropy. And in that study, it's clear that when people move in and out of itemizing, their giving changes dramatically.
Right. Just one quick question. You mentioned in your testimony that when rates go up, charitable giving declines. Historically, when rates have gone down, has charitable giving increased? Is the opposite true?
No.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. And let me join the chairman and welcome each of you, and thank you for being here today. I have a question for each member of the panel, and if you can just be very brief. I want to thank each of the experts for sharing your views and your thoughts. I would like to know if there is an option under consideration that would be better for increasing giving than others. Okay.
Mr. Lewis, I would say that certainly not putting a cap on deductions would keep from dampening it, but anything you do to shift the cost of giving from the donor to the beneficiary would be helpful. So creating special incentives among people who give would be helpful. I think that the charitable tax credit for non-itemizers, or some way for non-itemizers to get recognized, would be helpful. The problem is that I believe in democratizing philanthropy so that everyone can participate. Everyone should participate, but the philanthropy is skewed to the top, and so we need to find incentives that allow those people who care most about this and provide the largest sums of money to do so easily. I visited in the last 3 weeks with 2 people.
Time has expired. If you want to submit anything in writing for the remainder of his questions, you're free to do that.
Chief, so I think this is helpful to ask, after 96 years of principally the same charitable giving exemption. Is there a better way to encourage, reward charitable giving? And my question, though, is reverse of that. In the current tax code, which areas are probably the least effective in encouraging charitable giving? For example, someone raised the issue of the clothing deduction and sort of how that can be. My sense is it is going to occur one way or the other. People, rather than renting a storage unit, want to do something with clothes and items that they have. I'll ask the panel, what are the areas that we aren't quite as good as rewarding giving, and is there a better way to do it? And I'll open it up. You want to start?
No.
Ms.
Don't
Man,
have a
that was kind of easy. You just don't give up that easy here. Mr. Temple?
Well, I would say that, you know, one of the simplest things you can do to reward charitable giving is to have the tax credit for non-itemizers, so that you create an incentive for those people to, you know, to give and to give at higher levels.
Can you do that without risking, you know, a greater gaming of the system?
Well,
Or do you think
there
we
are
can do it in a good way.
As Mr. Sturley said, there are issues. There are enforcement issues that become involved when you make the credit available for non-itemizers, and how people would document that, et cetera.
You think it can be done?
I think it'd be possible, sure. But I'm not a tax law expert, nor am I an economist. But when you study giving, incentives matter in terms of how much people give, and not whether they give, but how much people give. And so that would be one way to encourage more giving. The more you can reward people for making a contribution, that is to supporting this sector of our society, or supporting it outside the government, to supporting it in ways that are meaningful to them, the more you strengthen democracy and I think increase philanthropy. So, you have to look at, the cost of giving matters to individuals. And so the research shows that over and over again, so that anything you can do to lower their cost of giving is in fact helpful.
Can I ask this? How much in that research is the tax break critical to their giving? How much of a motivator is that?
Well, it doesn't motivate whether they will give, but it motivates how much they will give and when they will make the gift. And again, another wonderful experiment in 1986-87, you saw people move their giving move their giving from 1987 to 1986. It's the only time in the Giving USA data that giving went down from one year to the next.
When we say moved it, they limited it.
They moved their giving forward into 1986 to take advantage of the higher marginal tax rates.
Right.
And then the giving dropped in 1987 in the aggregate. So, their giving is very price sensitive, not whether they give, but how much they give.
Okay.
Let me thank you all for being here. There are many people who express the theory that the more control individuals have over the use of whatever they give or is extracted from them, the more likely they are to give more. Let me just ask your opinion quickly relative to that theory.
I think it's not so much control, unless you mean control as having a choice about where you give, following your own values, fulfilling your own values. But I would echo what Mr. Gallagher and several have said, that it is in fact engagement. Organizations need to engage people and build trust. Research shows over and over again that when people trust organizations, they trust or trust highly, they give almost double the amount that they give if they don't trust.
I do have one quick question for Mr. Temple. It's sort of been touched on, but I want to sort of get to it at in a different way. You mentioned in your testimony, and you pointed out that the economy and consumer confidence is more important to charitable giving than tax incentives. So if we enact tax reform that grows the economy, do you believe that even if we limit the subsidy for the charitable deduction, that giving to charities will rise? So the economy grows, not just the tax brackets are changed and go from 6 to 2 to 10 and 25%, but the economy, as a result of tax reform, grows.
Well, yeah, the answer to that would be that there will be a lag if you do something to limit charitable gift deductions, but as the economy grows, the philanthropy would grow, would grow with it, and you would eventually overcome the downturn that's caused by negative incentives. I mean, there's just there are no two ways about it. We've looked at research going back now to 1960, analyzed the drivers of increases in giving year to year, and the two single biggest predictors of increases in giving are the rise in household income and the rise of the S&P.
And you see that happening even if we limit subsidies.
Yes, that correlation has existed through various tax schemes, but you can see where shifts take place inside the sector. I do not have with me, but I can get for you the research that shows what happened after 1986, because there was a redistribution of philanthropy from the very top of the economy distributed out throughout the middle class. And the top marginal tax rate folks decreased their giving, but they recovered about 10 years later. So that's what happens. You see a depression, but it will recover if you can really grow the economy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think you've made all the important points very wonderfully, that in fact, what we do know is that while a great deal of the money to the charitable sector comes from high-income households, that people at lower ends of that spectrum are more likely to give to their local communities, to people that are disadvantaged in some way, and they are also more likely to give a higher percentage of their incomes. It may not be the same in dollars, but they're giving lower income people give a higher percentage of their income than do higher income people. So all of these things argue, I think, for not only, but for the inclusion of benefits to non-itemizers as part of a package in tax reform.
Is there anybody on that panel that would disagree with what was just said?
No.
No. Okay. Then very quickly,
Ms. Sanchez, I would only say that our survey of high net worth households does show that 80% of them give to higher education, but 79% of them give to direct needs causes as well. So it's not true that the wealthy only give to very esoteric causes or the causes that help enhance human potential as opposed to reducing human suffering.
I understand, and I didn't mean to imply that. I was just making the case that lower income earners tend to more specifically give to those
All right.
those needs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Should we, as we craft policy in this area, should we give preferential tax treatment to those U.S. to donors who give to U.S. organizations who preferentially, say 50% or more of the time, provide services to American citizens and residents versus some overseas charitable type of event? I have no doubt about the importance of public health globally, but is this something we should consider as we look at policy? Mr. Tempel, if you want to start with that.
Well, I now would have to offer personal opinion because I don't think we have any research that shows this. I mean, one thing one might consider is what kind of an impact does that have on U.S. foreign policy if we were to encourage people to give locally rather than internationally. And international is growing, although it's a very small sliver of the total U.S. philanthropy pie. There's some. I think what happens is there are some very visible new donors who are spending a lot of their resources in developing countries, and so we notice that, but it's still a very small sliver. I did ask one of those donors why he gave in Africa, and he said, I've been to West Virginia, I've been everywhere in the United States, and he said, what you see in the United States, you can't even imagine. It doesn't even get close to what you see where I'm putting my money. So I think that's one of the ways one might consider it. It's a complicated issue, and of course we are one of the countries that allows people to make contributions here that benefit other countries. Many countries don't do that, but I think it probably is something you want to take into consideration in terms of the way in which the U.S. approaches its foreign aid program and foreign relations program.
Thank you.
Having said that, what do you think we could do to make the contributions to this type of work? What type of incentives could we do for this as opposed to other worthwhile foundation and charitable work? Is there anything that you can do so that if I decide that I want to get my deductions from a tax provision, that I can target it to the 10% rather than the 90%?
Mr. Engel,
Yeah.
I'd like to add a perspective to this. We actually did some research on this last year.
Good.
About 8% of money goes to direct need organizations. And, I can turn into a philosopher here if you're not careful, but philanthropy is really about reducing human suffering on one side and enhancing human potential on the other side.
What's the other side?
Enhancing human potential. My father and mother did not go to college. I'm a first-generation college. They did not go to high school. And so I'm the beneficiary of a scholarship, a need-based scholarship. About 23% of money that goes through all other organizations ends up benefiting need-based scholarships, job opportunities, job training, and other kinds, food banks and other kinds of...
Is that within your 8%?
What's that?
Is that within the...
23% of the money that goes to all organizations goes back to these needs. Yes.
Now, you have some data that you've accumulated?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a big
then
study.
I would broaden my question and ask, since so many people associate poverty and helping a person improve the quality of life, is there anything that you would think that we could target what we're talking about when we say charity?
And obviously time has expired, but if you could get us some of that data. And I believe Mr. Rangel is asking about more basic needs, not necessarily college education. I think you were thinking about basic needs, and I'm not sure that's the correct term. But
he mentioned they hadn't finished high school, and I would think that in today's economy that you have to include that. Now, how can you and I, before you leave, maybe you can direct me in the right direction?
We can send you things.
I'd like to see you before we leave, though.
That would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Young is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Tempel, earlier in your testimony, you, I think very helpfully and pointedly indicated that there's a direct correlation, very tight relationship between the state of the economy and the incidence and amount of charitable giving. You specifically identified sort of two metrics to look at, which is household income and the S&P rate in any given moment to determine what sort of charitable giving one might expect in the economy. So it's important from my perspective that we implement tax policy as we're embarking on comprehensive tax reform here that will grow household incomes in particular. I found it notable in your statement, Doctor, that higher income households provide a disproportionate share of giving. And you said you did a study in 2012 that examined giving by higher income households. What else can you tell us about giving by these households based on your study, sir?
Congressman Young, this is why the task you have ahead of you is so complicated, because there's so many different factors that work in different ways on charitable giving. But high income households, those incomes with incomes of $200,000 or more, $1 million in net worth excluding their homes, do give a disproportionate share of philanthropy. And as you look at that and study that, they give about 9%, actually about 9% of their household income, so compared to 2% generally. About 95% of them give, and as I said earlier, interestingly, 80% of them give to higher education. You would expect that, but 79% of them give to basic needs organizations. As illustrated by Mr. Gallagher's point, that he has $1 million and $10,000 donors. So those are the donors that will be impacted by any kinds of price sensitivity. So I think that's worth looking at. The other thing is we asked them for the first time 3 years ago. We do this study every 2 years. We asked them 3 years ago if they would increase, keep the same, or decrease their giving if the tax deduction were eliminated. And we use the phrase eliminated. And interestingly, about half of them said they would keep their giving the same, but about half of them said they would decrease their giving. And that percentage got worse as the economy got worse and as we got closer to these discussions. So we know that even, that they're sensitive to those things.
Thank you. What impact did the recession have on charitable giving, and how generally, can you tell me, are charities doing right now?
Well, in the aggregate, charitable giving went down by 15% over a 2-year period, 2009 and 2010. And there's been some recovery, but the last 2 years have recovered at an average rate of 1.8%. And so, going back to the earlier question I had, if you think about the slow growth of philanthropy now, and you did something, the economy will help philanthropy grow. There's no question about it. But if you do anything to dampen philanthropy now, it will simply prolong the length of time it takes to come out. The other thing is that not all charities, not all philanthropic organizations are hit the same by this downturn. There was, in fact, in 2009, an increase in giving to basic needs or human service organizations. But after 2009, that kind of evaporated. So people turned their attention back away from that. So you can see these kinds of things inside the economy.
Which leads me to my final question. You and other panelists have indicated concern, understandably, I think, about the financial consequences of changing tax policy with respect to charitable giving. Doctor, are there other perhaps intangible or unforeseen consequences that you can conceive of and that this panel should consider as we look to reform the overall tax code?
Yeah, just for the record, I did not come to argue in any direction, but just to point out how complex this issue is you're dealing with from the data we have. I would echo some other comments here that, one of the intangibles here is that this is the way people get involved. They get engaged in their communities this way. They give this way. They volunteer this way. And those things are all beneficial. But we have some emerging research that shows that when people give and volunteer, they have better health outcomes. And those could have huge public policy implications if we don't encourage this kind of activity.